I always think that I'm in a place where I try to cross certain boundaries and connect to people that maybe are having a different idea of space. And so I was just talking to somebody when you're outside and you have an idea of the spatial environment and you hear sounds and smells and other kinds of sensory perceptions, that it's hard for me to explain this experience to people who live in the city. And sometimes when people visit me outside, they come in their cars. And so the only way they experience the outside is through their windshield. And so they have no notion of sounds and smells, and that are only the basic ones. But to sort of move through space where you have imbalances and that kind of thing, it's very hard to explain to people what that is. And so in a weird way, I think that is the most normal way of experiencing space, but it seems that that becomes the quirkiness in these days. When I started my work, I worked with Native Americans. So my advisor of my work was a Tewa. She's an anthropologist, but also a filmmaker. And she would tell me, like, well, you don't listen to the land. And at first I was like, oh, or no, she said, you don't listen. And so first I thought, oh, we don't listen to what people are saying. But once I started going outside and sort of walking in the land, I realized that I have to listen to the landscape and not to what people are saying about it. So it's, you sort of get away from representations of land and just being in the land. So to sort of what the direct relationship with that is. But then I also started to work with agricultural communities, so Hispanic water management systems that have a very, the social organization is very close to the landscape itself. So there would be all sorts of names that refer to bodily things. And then I realized that I do this work and then I go back to my environment, my city environment, my lab environment, and I sort of lose this connection. And so then I thought, I really don't know anything about what is agriculture or what it is to connect to land. And so I decided actually to go out and volunteer in farms. And at first I thought, I will do this only for a little bit. But it's almost like you become addicted to this kind of thing. So it was like I would start reading, and I had the realization that I would become sort of intoxicated after reading for a whole day. It's like all these chemicals were surrounding me. So it's really strange that you become attuned to your environment, and it's very, I think, healing and nutritional that you're in. And so that's, I think now I'm in a place where I think that is the most important thing of how to do research and art, and where this can come together in a more sort of sensible way for me. Machine Wilderness is a group of artists and scientists who are rethinking the landscape and ecology and how we connect to this landscape. And it is through technologies, but what is called intimate technologies. So can we create technologies that don't interfere, but tap into this new technology or this new sort of way of thinking about landscape. And what we also want to do is to create a new methodology of how we do this kind of research. And I think that is the main reason why I was involved. So there's Teun Karelsen, an artist and Alice Smith, who actually initiated this project. And together with Alice, I'm talking a lot about how are we going to do this, what kind of methodology and sort of theoretical foundation do we bring to this. Otherwise, it just remains a series of workshops where people do things. I mean, it's very fun to go out in the landscape and sort of think about what a robot would do, or how can you connect in a particular time period. But the idea is that these experiences become at a certain point a foundation also for a new methodology. Well, art for me has always been important, because before I was a scientist, I was a textile designer. So it's always been strange for me to separate the two. For me, there are different approaches to a similar problem. And the nice thing about art is that it's exploratory. And in my scientific work, I always also do a lot of exploratory work, exploratory analysis. So I like that part of art science and how this comes together. I work, for instance, with Cecil Mariton and Jonathan Roos, who are doing a project called Sensory Cartographies. And so we work together. They are doing a lot of body sensors, and my part is more the environment, so stationary sensors in the environment, and we're trying to bring this together. We did, for instance, a workshop last year. It's called Surfing the Semiosphere, and in that we sort of fogged up a place, a very sort of industrial space. And participants in that project had body sensors of how their bodies reacted, so their heartbeats. And so they would go through these spaces and they didn't recognize it as industrial space, just the fog. And so that was very interesting. Like, how can we bring into space not only sort of this geometric idea, but sort of this spheric environment, and how this affects people. And because then you can start to think about the odors of the land, and also what does that do to your sense of balance and that kind of thing. Well, last year we organized a workshop in Italy where I invited an artist from New Zealand, Raywin Turner, who is an odor artist. And I'm not sure, but she's one of the few who actually does odors of the land. So we would go out and collect plants from the land, and we mixed it with wine, so to sort of taste different ideas of the landscape. They did a very interesting project, she with her partner, of odors that he made. He's an engineer, so he made these instruments that could release certain odors at specific time periods. And so that was really nice that we could actually do these kind of things, these ephemeral qualities of the land that you can start to explore. Well, I'm working in this field of biosemiotics, so that we're all in this sort of environment signal space that is swirling around us all the time, but we have no idea that this communication is going on. And so I think if we become aware of it's actually going on, then we can start to think about what are these energies that are around us, and what would certain species sense. And so the idea is to do simultaneously trying to figure out what it is that is, for instance, in your own sphere, what is going on outside your body. I mean, your body is also not sort of bounded by the skin, but there's a sphere around us that we exclude. So the idea is to sort of map these kind of signals and then trying to think of how can we slowly extend our abilities. Can we, for instance, use certain filters that would draw in passively these signals without interfering too much in our own bodies. I mean, there's some research with belts of, I'm not sure whether it's gravity or sort of magnetic fields, where you sort of, you feel these things and you start to adjust your behavior. Now I read that you can adapt once, but when you try to go back, it's really hard. So I'm not sure, you know, how difficult it is if you would do this all the time, this kind of changes. And also with Sissel, she did a project where about man-made earthquakes, how this could be made sensible to us right now. So there was a series of sensors and there were emitters in a space that if you would come too close, you would start to feel this rumbling and sort of in your body. So that kind of thing. So it's like, it doesn't have to be really invasive, but try to become aware of these signals. Bees are a very important species for human life. There's this idea, Einstein, I think, said this, that after bees die out, 4 years later, humans will die out. Because if bees are no longer there will be no, or very little edible plants for us, because they have to pollinate and otherwise there's no fruits. So the way we interfere in the bees' world is by putting all these kind of pesticides that they get in their bodies and die out. And so the way we have to start to think about this, there is no empty space. And I think that is a very Western idea that, you know, in mapping technologies, for instance, we map the surface and then there's empty space. We fill it up. I think we should start to think about this as a full space, and it's there's all kind of bandwidths that are there that we can use, but we have to be aware that they may be used by other species for millions of years. And so when we start to change things, like make chemical compounds that emit then chemicals in the sphere, this is a transformation. It's not something that is added to an empty space, but it's a transformation that's going on. And so the more you transform, the question is whether you can transform that back to a state that it was before. So that is a very complex issue. So by observing all these bees dying, if there's a field next to it that is being sprayed, that is a very sort of like it's an incredible strong image to see this happening. So I've observed this, and this is I mean, it makes you cry, really. This yeah, when we interfere in signals, and the most obvious one is actually sound signals, like bandwidths, where, for instance, birds are communicating. And what happens is that if we come into this space that are sort of rhythmic patterns, and we use that same bandwidth, for instance 24 hours, there's no space for birds to communicate. And we don't usually think of this as a material, but it is material. And I think that's what I'm trying to say with this whole idea, that it's not empty space, it's full. It's energy and matter that are specific objects that as humans we don't recognize as objects. And so I think that is a very important thing to take away, that there's objects in space that we don't sense. I like science where I can explore, so that's why I have a lot of affinity with artists. And I also like to be outside. So what is interesting in my last couple of years is that I've noticed that there are many other people that are having the same kind of ideas. And so I think there's a new sort of community forming that they don't respect these kind of boundaries between art and science and land practitioners. People do the same. They are interested in this becoming resensitized to the environment.